Ralston Vega wasn't exactly the poster child for cosmic justice, more like its cynical, slightly drunk uncle who only showed up for the free booze. But here he was, plunked down in the belly of an isolated space station, ready to testify in a trial that could very well decide the fate of a few billion souls. Or it could just decide how many zeros get added to some corp's bottom line, he muttered to himself, kicking an empty food packet across the docking bay. Tomato, tomato. The station, aptly named Oblivion's Edge, hung in the blackness like an unenthusiastic chandelier. If chandeliers were made of rusted metal and extremely bad decisions, that is. It orbited a collapsing star, its last light more of a dim wheeze than a blaze. Ralston had seen better glow out of a corner dive's neon sign. "Welcome to the armpit of the universe," he said to no one in particular, except maybe the vague shadow of his own questionable judgment. The docking bay doors slid open with the kind of reluctant groan you'd expect from a teenager asked to clean their room. Ralston stepped out, leather boots scuffing against the poorly polished floor. The air smelled metallic, with a hint of desperation that probably came free with every third maintenance request ignored. Ralston wasn't alone for long. A man dressed in a uniform that had seen better years approached him. Officer Curl. The name badge might as well have said, "I don't get paid enough for this crap," Vega, Curl said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of a funeral director after Ior's. "Curl," Ralston replied, flashing a grin that had gotten him out of trouble more times than he'd care to admit. "Still working the glamorous end of the universe, I see," Curl snorted, a sound that suggested a lifelong habit of disappointment. "And you're still keeping the galaxy entertained with your unique brand of charm. Got to stick with what you know," Ralston shrugged. "Speaking of which, where's this trial of the century happening? I assume it's not in the broom closet, but with budget cuts, who knows?" Curl gestured down a corridor that looked like it had been designed by a committee of particularly unimaginative bureaucrats. "This way. And try not to break anything. We've got a maintenance backlog that's longer than a politician's promise list." They moved through the station, past flickering lights and panels held together by what Ralston assumed was the engineering equivalent of a prayer. "So, who am I testifying against this time?" Ralston asked. "Or is it one of those surprise, you're actually the defendant kind of deals?" "Because I've got to tell you, I'm really not in the mood for plot twists," Curl shrugged, not breaking his stride. "Some bigwig corporate types. Accusations of corruption, bribery, general malfeasance. You know, the usual Thursday afternoon. And they need a washed-up merc like me because—" Ralston let the question hang, knowing full well that he was probably just one cog in a machine built on half-truths and plausible deniability. "Because, believe it or not, you were in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place at the right time, depending on how you look at it," Curl replied. "And because you don't look half bad in that suit." Ralston looked down at his standard-issue testimony suit, a drab gray number that did nothing for his complexion. "Guess they didn't get the memo on merc fashion. I do miss my combat boots, though. These shoes are killing me." They reached a door marked Judiciary Chambers in big, bold letters, as if the architect had something to prove. Curl punched in a code and the door slid open with an inadequate hiss. Inside, the chamber was as grim as it was gray, a place where joy came to die. The judge sat at a bench, a hulking figure with a permanent scowl etched into their face, probably a prerequisite for the job. Around the room, various officials and corporate types pretended to look interested, although Ralston could see they were more concerned about their next pay raise. "Vega," the judge barked in a voice that could strip paint, "nice of you to join us. We were just discussing whether or not this whole trial is a colossal waste of time." "Well, Your Honor, if it makes you feel any better, I'm only here for the free drinks," Ralston replied, earning a few smothered chuckles from the gallery. "It doesn't," the judge said dryly, motioning for him to step forward. "Now let's get this circus started." As Ralston took the stand, he could feel the weight of a billion uninterested eyes. The gravity of the situation would have been overwhelming if he wasn't so used to being on the wrong side of a blaster. "You are here to testify against the representatives of Neutron Corp," the judge began, already looking bored. Accused of siphoning resources from collapsing star systems under the guise of humanitarian aid, Ralston scratched at his jaw thoughtfully. "You know, I've heard of creative accounting, but this takes the cake. Or the star, as it were. Please stick to the facts, Mr. Vega," the judge said, a hint of warning in their voice. "Right, right. Facts. Well, I was on a supply run through the Vortex Belt, mostly minding my own business, when I spotted these Neutron Corp ships having a little party on the edge of a dying system," Ralston said. "Seemed odd since usually you'd find folks running away from collapsing stars, not towards them, and," the judge prompted, "and I decided to stick around for a bit. Turns out they were taking more than their fair share. A lot more, like a hoarder at a yard sale. Only instead of old furniture, we're talking about precious ion deposits." The gallery murmured appreciatively, like a crowd watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat. "But here's the kicker," Ralston continued. "They weren't just taking the good stuff. They were leaving behind toxic waste, the kind that makes your average industrial spill look like a toddler's potty accident. That's when I knew something stank, and it wasn't just the station's air system." The judge leaned forward, their interest piqued for the first time. "Do you have evidence of this?" they asked, narrowing their eyes. Ralston smiled, reaching into his pocket. "You bet your gavel I do. Holo footage, audio logs, the whole shebang. I figured it might come in handy, considering how much I enjoy sticking it to the man." He handed over a data chip, which an aide quickly whisked away to verify. The room buzzed with a low hum of tension, like a ship's engine on the verge of blowing. Curl leaned in, whispering, "You actually got something on them. I'm impressed." "I thought you'd just make a scene and bail, and miss this chance to be the galaxy's most reluctant hero," Ralston replied. "Not on your life. Besides, I figure this way I might get a free lunch out of the deal," the aide returned, nodding to the judge, who looked decidedly less bored now. "Well, it seems Mr. Vega isn't just spinning tales," the judge declared. "This evidence is damning." Ralston took a mock bow. "What can I say? I'm a multi-talented disaster." As the judge called for a recess, Ralston stepped down, feeling the eyes of the corporate bigwigs boring into him like particularly angry lasers. He was used to it. He'd been the thorn in more than one side over the years and wore it like a badge of honor. Curl walked beside him as they left the chamber. "You know, this is probably going to make you some powerful enemies," he pointed out. "Join the club," Ralston said. "I'll put it on the pile with all the others. Besides, it's not like I'm planning to live forever." They reached the corridor, the door sliding shut behind them with a finality that was almost comforting. "So, what's next for the galaxy's most unlikely hero?" Curl asked. "Oh, I don't know," Ralston replied, scratching his head. "Maybe I'll start a cooking blog, or become a tour guide for collapsing stars. Either way, I'm open to suggestions." As they walked away, the lights flickered ominously, and Ralston couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just stepped into a much larger mess than either of them had anticipated. But then again, what were space stations for if not housing the universe's most inconvenient secrets? And as he considered the next steps, a little voice in the back of his mind, the one that usually kept him from getting shot, told him that this was just the beginning. Ralston Vega settled onto the uncomfortable cot in his assigned quarters on Oblivion's edge, a room that had all the charm of a prison cell but with more creative stains. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking about his upcoming testimony. The station had an eerie stillness, like a graveyard before the undead decided to throw a party. "You know," Ralston said to the silence, "I didn't think my career would bring me to a place that makes my ex's living room look inviting." The walls seemed to absorb his words, as if the station had grown tired of listening to the complaints of its inhabitants. It wasn't long before the door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and Officer Curl popped his head in. "Ralston, you've got that look," Curl said, leaning against the doorframe. "The one that says you're either deep in thought or you're constipated." "Could be both," Ralston replied with a wry grin. "Tell me, Curl, have you ever tried to escape from a place like this?" "Not that I'm planning, just curious," Curl chuckled. "Oblivion's Edge isn't so much a place you escape from as one you eventually get kicked out of. Usually feet first." Ralston couldn't help but laugh. "So, what's the story with this station? Feels like it's got more skeletons in its closet than a necromancer's convention." Curl frowned, a rare show of genuine emotion. "The station's been around longer than most care to remember. Used to be a mining outpost back when the star it's orbiting was still somewhat alive. When the star started dying, the corporations pulled out, leaving behind a shell. Over the years, it's become a haven for those wanting to keep a low profile, or a no profile," Ralston added, glancing at the dim lighting and the general state of disrepair. "Exactly. But it's more than just the usual haunt for drifters and fugitives. There are stories of things." Ralston arched an eyebrow. "Things?" "That's delightfully vague." Curl shifted, uncomfortable. "People talk about an unsettling presence. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Strange noises. Some say it's haunted, but I think it's just the reactor failing. Nothing like a potentially haunted station to spice up a trial," Ralston quipped. "But I've dealt with enough spooks in my time, and most of them were just poor bastards who didn't know when to stay dead." Curl nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "Just watch your back, Ralston. Some people think the station's history doesn't want to be uncovered." Ralston waved him off. "I'll keep an eye out. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? I get lost and end up in a broom closet." Curl left him to his thoughts, and Ralston lay back, staring at the flickering light above. He tried to shake off the unease, but it clung like an unwanted guest. As he closed his eyes, he listened to the faint hum of the station, a sound that seemed to whisper secrets in a language he couldn't understand. Sometime later, after drifting into an uneasy sleep, Ralston was jolted awake by the sensation of being watched. He sat up, blinking into the darkness. The room was still, the only movement the rise and fall of his own breath. He chalked it up to paranoia and the station's creaky infrastructure. But as he lay back down, he could have sworn he saw a shadow glide across the wall, a flicker in the periphery of his vision. He stared at the spot for a moment, debating whether to get up and investigate. In the end, he decided that whatever it was, it could wait until morning. After all, if it was planning to kill him, it was doing a lousy job of it. The next day, Ralston found himself trying to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of Oblivion's Edge. The station seemed to have been designed by someone with a vendetta against logic. Signs were either missing or pointed in the wrong direction, and every junction looked maddeningly similar. After several wrong turns and a brief encounter with a wall that seemed insulted to have been bumped into, Ralston finally stumbled into the cafeteria. A place where the food was as lifeless as the star outside, but still somehow managed to keep people coming back for more. He grabbed a tray, eyeing the offerings with suspicion. "Well, at least I won't have to worry about getting poisoned," he muttered to himself. "This stuff could survive a nuclear winter." As he sat down, Curl appeared with his own tray, the contents of which looked equally unappealing. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Curl said, taking a seat across from him. Ralston shrugged. "Maybe I have. This place is playing tricks on me, or maybe I'm just losing my mind," Curl smirked. "If you're going mad, welcome to the club. We've got jackets." They ate in companionable silence, punctuated only by the occasional crunch of something that shouldn't have been crunchy. Ralston found himself glancing around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But the only thing lurking was the realization that he was in way over his head. After breakfast, Ralston made his way to the preparation room to get ready for the trial. The room was as utilitarian as the rest of the station, with a single mirror and a set of clothes that looked like they'd been through more trials than he had. "Here we go again," he said to his reflection, straightening his tie. "Another day, another chance to piss off the wrong people." As he adjusted his suit, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. The sudden absence of light was like being blindfolded by an unseen hand. Ralston stood still, heart thumping, until the lights sputtered back to life. "Okay, that's enough of that," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "I've had just about all the mysterious ambience I can handle." He left the room with purposeful strides, trying to ignore the sensation that something was keeping pace just out of sight. As he approached the judiciary chambers, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman, her face half lit by the dim glow of a wall panel. "Ralston Vega, I presume," she said, her voice smooth and untroubled, a sharp contrast to the chaos swirling in his own mind. "That's me," Ralston replied, studying her with cautious interest. "And you are call me Lyra," she said, stepping into the light. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, with a hint of mischief that suggested she knew more than she let on. "Lyra. Nice name." Ralston offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did Curl send you to keep me out of trouble?" She chuckled softly. "No, I'm here of my own accord. Word around the station is you're about to stir the pot. I like to keep an eye on things that might boil over." "Well, consider this pot thoroughly stirred," Ralston said, his tone light but edged with curiosity. "I assume you're not with Neutron Corp. Let's just say I'm interested in seeing how this plays out," Lyra replied cryptically. "And maybe I wanted to see the man who's got the entire station buzzing." Ralston shrugged. "I'm just a guy trying to make it through the day without getting shot. Or worse, bored." "Good luck with that," Lyra said with a knowing smile. "Just remember, in a place like this, it's not always what you see that gets you." With that, she turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Ralston with more questions than answers. Inside the judiciary chambers, the atmosphere was as tense as a coiled spring. The corporate representatives sat in their polished suits, exuding an air of smug confidence that was almost irritating. The judge, who looked like they'd just swallowed something sour, called the proceedings to order. "Mr. Vega, please take the stand," the judge intoned, their voice echoing off the walls like a death knell. Ralston took his place, trying to ignore the way his skin prickled with the awareness of 1,000 unblinking eyes watching his every move. He caught a glimpse of Curl, who gave him a subtle nod, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both encouragement and a reminder not to screw up. "Mr. Vega," the judge began, "you've provided evidence that suggests Neutron Corp has been conducting illegal operations. Please explain how you came by this information." Ralston took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Well, Your Honor, it's not like I stumbled upon it while looking for a place to park. I was hired for a supply run, and it just so happened that Neutron Corp was throwing one hell of a party by a collapsing star. And what, pray tell, were they celebrating?" the judge asked, one eyebrow raised. Ralston leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of a well-rehearsed tale. "Siphoning resources, dumping toxic waste, kind of like a cosmic yard sale without the haggling." A ripple of amusement ran through the gallery, quickly stifled by the glares of the corporate representatives. "Order," the judge demanded, though there was a hint of amusement in their voice too. "Continue, Mr. Vega," Ralston nodded. "I recorded what I saw, figuring it might be useful. Turns out I was right. The footage shows Neutron Corp taking more than their share and leaving the rest to rot. Not exactly what you'd call a humanitarian effort." The judge glanced at the corporate representatives, who were whispering among themselves like a bunch of schoolchildren caught passing notes. "And you're willing to testify under oath that this is what you witnessed?" Ralston met the judge's gaze. "I swear on my last decent bottle of whiskey." The judge gave a curt nod. "Very well, we will review the evidence. Until then, this session is adjourned." As Ralston stepped down, he felt the tension in the room shift, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The corporate types glared daggers at him, their expressions a mix of disbelief and barely contained rage. Outside the chambers, Curl caught up with him, his face a rare mask of genuine concern. "You did good in there, but watch your back. These guys don't play fair." Ralston shrugged. "I've never played fair a day in my life, so I guess we're even." As they walked down the corridor together, Ralston felt that familiar unease creeping back, the sense that something was lurking just beyond the edge of perception. He glanced at Curl, who seemed lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" Ralston asked, trying to keep his tone light. Curl hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Just thinking about what Lyra said. She's not one to get involved unless there's something big at stake." Ralston nodded, remembering the enigmatic woman he'd met earlier. "Seems like everyone's got a vested interest in this mess." "Makes you wonder what's really going on," Curl grunted in agreement. "In a place like this, anything could be going on." As they turned a corner, Ralston's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flicker of the lights, plunging the corridor into darkness. He tensed, instincts honed by years of dodging trouble kicking in. "Great," Ralston muttered. "Just what we need, a power outage." But even as the lights flickered back on, the unsettling feeling lingered, as if the station itself was conspiring against them. Ralston couldn't shake the sense that they were walking into something far bigger than a simple corporate scandal. And as they continued down the corridor, he knew one thing for certain. Oblivion's edge was hiding secrets, and he was right in the middle of a game he hadn't quite meant to play. Ralston Vega adjusted his grip on the toolkit, feeling the comforting weight of the battered metal case. Oblivion's edge was in one of its moods again, flickering lights and all, as if the station had decided to throw a tantrum just to make his day extra special. The corridor stretched ahead, a maze designed by someone who'd clearly thrived on infuriating strangers. "Bloody stations got a worse attitude than a pissed-off raccoon," Ralston grumbled, kicking at an uncooperative floor panel that dared to squeak. The panel remained unimpressed, much like the rest of the universe. "Raccoons," Curl, trailing behind like a curious shadow, piped up, eyebrows raised. "What, those little earth pests? You do realize we're several light years away from that backwater ball of dirt, right?" "Just my luck," Ralston shot back. "I leave for space, and somehow the cosmic varmint spirit follows me." They were making their way to the station's underbelly, where life support systems puttered along like an old man on a rusty bicycle. If there was one place on Oblivion's edge that could use a motivational speech, it was down here. The station's guts were a labyrinth of outdated tech and piping held together by duct tape and prayer. "Someone's been messing with the life support," Curl said, his voice barely a whisper. "Looked like sabotage." Ralston stopped short, turning to give Curl the kind of look you'd reserve for someone trying to sell you oceanfront property on Mars. "You're telling me somebody's got it in for us?" Curl snorted, an unpleasant sound that reminded Ralston of a synth drum solo gone wrong. Surprised. "You've been stepping on enough toes to start a dance hall. Tell me about it," Ralston replied dryly as they reached the maintenance hatch. "I just wish they'd take a number and wait their turn." The hatch groaned open, revealing the cramped crawlspace. It was the sort of place that didn't just smell like regret but had probably hosted it for dinner last night. Wires hung like limp spaghetti, and the air was thick with the scent of burnt circuitry. "After you," Curl said, gesturing like a gracious host offering the worst seat in the house. Ralston sighed. "Don't mind if I do, seeing as I'm the one with the toolbox." He clambered inside, the narrow passage pressing in on him like an over-enthusiastic ant. The crawl through the station's bowels was a slow, uncomfortable journey. Here, even shadows seemed reluctant to linger, as if they were afraid of catching something terminal. Ralston paused at a junction, examining a set of wires that had been meticulously cut, then patched back together like a bad medical drama. "Not your average wear and tear," he muttered, pulling out his tools to start the painstaking job of resplicing. "Someone's got a grudge." "I can smell it." Curl asked, craning his neck around the bend. "Or are you just catching a whiff of yourself?" "Personal hygiene's important, you know," Ralston barked a laugh. "Hygiene? I'm trying to survive, not impress. Besides, this place has a way of making every smell permanent." The work was slow, each wire demanding careful handling and a steady hand. Not exactly Ralston's forte, more like his left foot. But he managed, elbow deep in tech and sarcasm. "Why do you think they're doing this?" Curl asked, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. Ralston considered, his brow furrowing as he tightened a connection. Could be anyone on this station. Hell, it could be the station itself, fed up with our antics. Maybe it's Lyra's friends, Curl suggested, his tone half joking, half serious. Maybe, Ralston said, though the idea didn't settle well. Lyra had a way of appearing just when things got interesting, like a bad penny or a persistent creditor. Eventually, Ralston finished with the wires, satisfied that at least this section wouldn't blow them all to hell. He backed out of the crawl space, muscles protesting the cramped conditions. "Think we've earned a break," Curl said, glancing around as if expecting the station itself to object. Ralston wiped his hands on his trousers, leaving greasy smears. "A drink's what we've earned. Preferably something strong enough to make me forget where I am for a few hours." As they headed back toward the main corridors, the station shuddered, a familiar, unsettling tremor. Ralston paused, feeling the vibration travel up through his boots. "That's not right," Curl said, frowning. "Feels like trouble." Ralston finished for him. "Seems like we're about to get plenty of it." The intercom crackled to life, static hissing and popping before a voice emerged, strained and urgent. "All hands report to emergency stations." "Repeat, all hands." The message cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. "Well, that's never a good sign," Curl said, deadpan. Ralston sighed, shoulders slumping. "Guess our break's canceled. Time to see what fresh hell awaits." They made their way to the central hub where a small crowd had gathered, faces tense and wary. The station's usual hum was absent, replaced by the unsettling sound of silence, the kind that signaled something was about to go very, very wrong. "Ralston Vega," a voice called out, cutting through the murmur of conversation. It was Lyra, appearing at his elbow as if conjured by thought alone. "Lyra," Ralston said, managing a smile. "Here to see the fireworks," something like that, she replied, eyes narrowed as she scanned the room. "Got a feeling we're not dealing with just a technical glitch." "Tell me something I don't know," Ralston said, though he was grateful for the confirmation. "Any ideas?" She shrugged, a graceful movement that belied the tension in her stance. "Nothing good, I can assure you. I prefer my chaos predicted, not served up as a surprise special." "Then we're in the same boat," Ralston said, crossing his arms. "Heard anything from the higher-ups?" "Radio silence," Lyra replied, her expression grim. "Which means we're flying blind." Curl, who had been eavesdropping with all the subtlety of a neon sign, leaned in. "So what's the plan, then?" Ralston hesitated, glancing between Lyra and Curl. "We figure out what's going on and stop it before Oblivion's edge decides to live up to its name." "Easier said than done," Curl muttered, shaking his head. "Just the way I like it," Ralston replied, a wry grin tugging at his lips. The station shuddered again, more violently this time, as if underscoring the point. The crowd shifted nervously, whispers rising like smoke. "Time to move," Lyra said, urgency sharpening her voice. "I've got a contact in engineering who might know what's happening. Follow me." Ralston and Curl exchanged glances, then fell in step behind her. The corridor stretched ahead, a path of dim light and flickering shadows. The kind of place where trouble didn't just lurk, it waved banners and shouted insults. "Hope your contacts got answers," Ralston said, keeping pace with Lyra. "Better than us standing around waiting for the end," she replied, her tone dry as bone. The engineering bay was a mess of wires, tools, and the occasional panicked technician. Lyra led them to a man hunched over a console, his face illuminated by the sickly green glow of the monitor. "Jace," she said, tapping his shoulder. "We need intel." Jace looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and relief. "Lyra. Good to see you in one piece." "Likewise," she replied, gesturing to Ralston and Curl. "This is Ralston Vega and Officer Curl. They're here to help." Ralston offered a nod. "Judging by the shaking, I'd say you've got a problem." Jace grimaced. "Understatement of the century. Someone's been tampering with the station's core systems. We're running on borrowed time. Any idea who's behind it? Curl asked, crossing his arms. Could be anyone, Jace said with a shrug. But I've managed to isolate a signal from the central hub. Whoever it is, they're still on board. Typical, Ralston said, rubbing his forehead as if he could massage away the frustration. Any chance we can shut it down before Oblivion's edge becomes a shooting star? Jace hesitated, then nodded. If we can access the mainframe, maybe. But it's a long shot. Long shots are my specialty, Ralston said, pulling out his toolkit. Lead the way. The group moved quickly through the corridors, the station's ominous groans accompanying them like a dismal soundtrack. Ralston's mind was a whirl of calculations and possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. As they entered the control room, Ralston felt the oppressive weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The mainframe loomed ahead, a behemoth of metal and cables that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Here goes nothing, he muttered, diving into the tangle of wires with a grim determination. Curl hovered nearby, his presence a steadying force even amidst the chaos. You've got this, Vega. Just remember what's at stake. No pressure then, Ralston said, his fingers flying over the controls. Just the lives of everyone on this tin can. Lyra kept watch, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. If anyone can pull this off, it's you. Ralston snorted, focusing on the task at hand. Flattery's nice, but I prefer a good drink. The station trembled, a reminder that their time was running short. Ralston worked furiously, bypassing damaged circuits and rerouting power to critical systems. Nearly there, he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. Just a few more, there, the mainframe hummed to life, a low, satisfying thrum that resonated through the control room. Ralston exhaled, relief washing over him like a cool breeze. Did it work? Curl asked, glancing around as if expecting the station to explode out of spite. Ralston checked the readouts, then nodded. For now, we're safe. But we still need to find the saboteur before they try again. Never a dull moment, Lyra said, a hint of admiration in her voice. But you handled it like a pro. Ralston offered a weary grin. What can I say? I have a knack for surviving disasters. As they left the control room, Ralston couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The station might have been temporarily stabilized, but the real threat was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Oblivion's edge, with all its secrets and dangers, had just become a battlefield, and Ralston Vega found himself caught in the middle of a war he hadn't signed up for. But then again, when had that ever stopped him before? Ralston Vega was back in the belly of Oblivion's edge, where the walls weren't just closing in. They were mocking him for thinking he had any sort of plan. The control room was only slightly less hostile than the rest of the station, but at least here, the beeping consoles offered a semblance of order amidst the chaos. That order was, of course, hanging by a thread, probably one he'd have to splice back together any minute now. Hell of a day, huh? Curl said, leaning against the nearest console with all the grace of a collapsing shelf. I've had hangovers less violent than this. Ralston let out a dry chuckle, his fingers still itching from playing nursemaid to the console earlier. Yeah, and just as likely to leave us dead in a ditch. You think someone's trying to kill us, or is the station just having a bad day? Curl shrugged, a gesture he had mastered that seemed to say, we're all screwed, but maybe there's beer later. Could be a bit of both. I'd like to think the universe is just having a laugh at our expense. Laugh all it wants, Ralston muttered. We've got work to do. Lyra's contact, Jace, was hunched over the main console, tapping keys with the fervor of someone who knew his life depended on it. I've isolated the signal, he said without looking up. But whoever's behind this keeps bouncing it around the station's systems like a drunken pinball. Guess they've got a sense of humor, Ralston said, peering over Jace's shoulder. Any chance you can trace it back before we all start floating in space? Jace looked up, his eyes shadowed and tired. I'll need more time. And maybe a miracle, Ralston smirked. I'm fresh out of miracles, but I've got a screwdriver and a bad attitude. Will that do? Lyra approached, her stance as sharp and unyielding as a knife's edge. We need allies. People who know this station better than the saboteur does. Good luck with that, Ralston said. Most folks here have the loyalty of a politician in a scandal. I might know a few who'll help, Lyra said, her voice steady as steel. If we can convince them to get off their asses. Ralston nodded, his mind already running through the list of candidates. Curl, you up for a little recruiting? Are we paying in liquor or empty promises? Ralston laughed, a harsh barking sound. Whichever gets the job done. The station groaned again, a sound that had become all too familiar. It was as if Oblivion's edge was a grumpy old man, fed up with their antics and ready to kick them off his lawn. Right, Ralston said, slapping Curl on the back. Let's round up some volunteers before this place decides to shake us loose. They moved through the corridors, a trio of determination and desperation. The lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a strobe-lit reality that made even the most mundane objects look sinister. So, Curl, Ralston said as they walked. Think we'll find anyone stupid enough to join this suicide mission? Curl grinned, a wicked gleam in his eyes. Oh, I'm sure there are a few. Misery loves company, after all. Their first stop was the mess hall, where the usual crowd of disinterested misfits was huddled over trays of gray mush. Ralston took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task at hand. All right, listen up, he said, raising his voice above the low murmur of conversation. We've got a saboteur on board this tin can, and if we don't stop them, we're all going to be spaced faster than you can say bad career choice. Most of the faces that turned his way wore expressions that ranged from bored to mildly curious. A few showed outright disdain, which was about what Ralston expected. Anyone interested in not dying today? He continued, trying to channel the charisma of a rock star rather than a desperate space tech. A few hands went up, more from curiosity than conviction. Ralston nodded, his spirits lifting. Great. Meet us in the control room in 10. Lyra raised an eyebrow as they turned to leave. That the best you've got? Ralston shrugged. Worked better than my last job interview. The calls for help were met with mixed results, but by the time they returned to the control room, a ragtag group had assembled. It was a collection of grim faces, each one stamped with the kind of world-weary resignation that only came from living on Oblivion's edge. All right, folks, Ralston said, addressing them with as much authority as he could muster. We're going to hunt down this bastard and put an end to this. A tall, wiry man with a face like crumpled paper spoke up. And how do we know you're not the ones causing all this trouble? Ralston rolled his eyes. If I were sabotaging the station, I'd have done a much cleaner job than this mess. There was a murmur of agreement, and the crumpled man nodded slowly. Fair point. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the gathered crew. We need eyes and ears everywhere. Anyone who knows this station, its twists, its turns, where a person could hide, speak up. A heavy-set woman with arms like tree trunks grinned. I know a few places. Hell, I've slept in most of them. Great, Ralston said. You're with me. As they split into teams, Ralston felt a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the reality of their situation, but it was there all the same. They patrolled the corridors, eyes peeled for anything suspicious. The station's oppressive silence made every creak and groan sound ominous, as if Oblivion's edge itself was conspiring against them. Ralston couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, shadows lurking in every corner. You ever think this place is haunted? Curl asked, breaking the silence with his usual irreverence. Ralston snorted. If it is, the ghosts are doing a piss-poor job of scaring us off. Maybe they're just biding their time. Ralston shook his head, focusing on the task at hand. Let's just find this saboteur before they turn us into space debris. They moved through the station's underbelly, where the life support systems thrummed with a stubborn determination not to fail. It was a place of tangled wires and hissing pipes, where the air had a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. Feels like we're in the guts of a giant beast, Curl said, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Ralston chuckled. And here I thought we'd been swallowed whole. They continued their search, peering into every nook and cranny. It was a painstaking process, but Ralston knew it was their only chance. If they didn't find the saboteur soon, they'd all be taking an unscheduled spacewalk. Their search led them to the station's cargo bay, a vast, echoing chamber filled with crates stacked like a child's forgotten playthings. It was the kind of place where secrets could lurk, hidden away in the shadows. "Think they are in here?" Curl asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ralston nodded, his instincts tingling. "Feels like the kind of place where trouble likes to hide." They crept among the crates, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Ralston's heart pounded in his chest, a steady drumbeat that matched the tension in the air. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "Perfect," Ralston muttered, fumbling for the flashlight clipped to his belt. "Just what we needed." The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but shadows and crates. But Ralston knew better than to trust his eyes. The saboteur was here somewhere, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A sound echoed through the bay, a soft scuffling that set Ralston's nerves on edge. He swung the flashlight around, the beam skittering over the walls like a startled animal. "There," Curl whispered, pointing toward a stack of crates in the corner. They moved cautiously, the beam of light their only guide. As they approached, Ralston's pulse quickened, adrenaline surging through his veins. And then they saw it, a figure crouched behind the crates, tools in hand, working with frantic speed. "Stop right there!" Ralston shouted, his voice slicing through the darkness like a knife. The figure froze, then sprang to life, darting away with the agility of a hunted animal. "Damn it!" Ralston cursed, giving chase. The saboteur wove through the crates, a shadow among shadows. Ralston followed, his breath coming in harsh gasps as he struggled to keep up. "Don't let them get away!" Curl shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Ralston pushed himself harder, his legs burning with exertion. The saboteur was fast, but desperation lent Ralston speed. They reached the far side of the cargo bay, where the crates thinned out and the walls closed in. The saboteur paused, glancing back with wide, fearful eyes. Ralston skidded to a halt, his flashlight illuminating the figure fully for the first time. It was a young woman, her face drawn and desperate, eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. "Why?" Ralston demanded, breathless. "Why are you doing this?" She hesitated, her gaze darting between Ralston and the exit. "You wouldn't understand. Try me," he said, stepping forward cautiously. She shook her head, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "This station, this life, it's a trap. We're all just waiting to die." Ralston softened, understanding dawning. "You think blowing us all to hell is the solution?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "At least it'll be quick." Curl arrived, panting and ready for a fight. "We can help you," Ralston said, keeping his voice calm. "But you need to stop this." For a moment she wavered, the fight draining out of her. But then the ferocity returned, a fire that refused to be quenched. "No one can help." Before either man could react, she turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows once more. Ralston cursed, the sound echoing hollowly in the empty bay. "We can't let her keep doing this." "Agreed," Curl said, his expression grim. "But at least we've got a face now." Ralston nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "We'll find her. And we'll stop her." The station groaned around them, a reminder of the ticking clock they all faced. Ralston knew they had to act fast, or Oblivion's edge would live up to its name in the most final way possible. They returned to the control room, the reality of their situation settling over them like a shroud. Every second counted, and they'd need every bit of cunning and courage to survive. Ralston Vega had never been a hero, but he'd be damned if he was going to go down without a fight. Ralston Vega squinted into the near-total darkness of the control room, feeling like he was trapped inside a tin can with a particularly malicious gremlin. Oblivion's edge, it seemed, was in a mood worse than usual. The whole station felt like it was hanging on by a thread frayed, thinner than patience at a bureaucrat's convention. "Well," Ralston muttered to himself, trying to conjure any semblance of optimism, "at least it can't get worse." The universe, always with a cheeky sense of humor, immediately proved him wrong. The lights flickered back into pitiful life, casting everything in a sickly hue that made the grime on the walls look positively artistic in comparison. "Ralston, you there?" Curl's voice crackled over the intercom, a testament to the station's affinity for broken promises. "Or did the universe finally grant my wish and swallow you whole, still here with all the cockroaches?" Ralston shot back, scanning the room like a watchful hawk, albeit one contemplating if the ground might be a more suitable habitat. "What's the status?" "Life support's about as stable as a three-legged table," Curl replied, his tone a blend of sarcasm and resignation. "Air's getting thin enough to make a fish feel at home." He chuckled, the sound like a dying engine sputtering its last. "Wonderful," Ralston groaned, running a hand through hair that hadn't seen shampoo since long before the current crisis. The air tasted faintly of despair and burnt circuitry, a heady cocktail to get anyone in the mood for a panic attack. With communication lines flickering in and out like a bad romance, allies were becoming as rare as a polite politician. Lyra was out there somewhere, her determination likely leading her to places Ralston wouldn't visit without a bodyguard and a will. He just hoped she wasn't adding to the body count. The saboteur had already made it clear they weren't picky about collateral damage. "Try not to choke on your own fumes," Curl added, his voice dripping with what might have passed for concern if you didn't know him. "And maybe find that saboteur before we all turn into space popsicles." "Helpful as always, Curl," Ralston replied, moving toward the console with all the enthusiasm of someone approaching their own execution. It was still functional, in the way a corpse might be labeled as such because it hadn't rotted completely. Yet. The screen glowed dimly, displaying a series of graphs and numbers that would mean something to someone less concerned with immediate survival and more inclined toward statistical analysis. Ralston tapped a few keys, trying to coax any useful data from the station's failing systems. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and Curl sauntered in, looking like a man who'd just been asked to identify a body. "Heard you liked bad news, so I brought you a buffet." Ralston raised an eyebrow. "Please, I'm on a diet." "Only good news, thanks," Curl shrugged, the corners of his mouth twitching up in that irreverent grin he wore like a badge of honor. "Then you're going hungry." "Power's out in half the station, and what's left is playing a game of hide and seek with sanity." "Great," Ralston said, slumping into a chair that wheezed in protest. "Just great." Curl leaned against the console, his expression a study in sardonic amusement. "On the bright side, we're too small for anyone to care about attacking us. We might implode from sheer incompetence first." Ralston let out a bark of laughter that echoed in the empty room. "Death by administrative error." "That's a new one," so Curl said, slicing through the laughter with the precision of a practiced pessimist. "What's the plan?" Ralston sighed, staring at the console as if it held the secrets of the universe, and maybe a good recipe for survival. "We find our little saboteur and convince them that living is more fun than dying." "And how do you plan to do that?" Curl asked, folding his arms like a skeptical parent. Ralston grinned, though the expression felt more like a grimace. "By proving we're more annoying than any potential death they can offer." "Solid plan," Curl said, tipping an imaginary hat. "If only you could weaponize sarcasm." Ralston punched a few more buttons, the screen blurring in and out of focus like it had been out drinking the night before. "We need eyes on every corridor that's still lit. See if we can't catch our little friend before they decide to pull another vanishing act." Curl nodded, pushing off from the console with the weary air of someone who'd seen too many bad ideas come to fruition. "I'll rally the troops, or what's left of them. You stay here and try not to break anything else." Ralston watched him go, a small part of him marveling at the fact that they were all still alive. But as the door slid shut with a finality he didn't like, he felt the weight of their situation press down on him like a particularly aggressive paperweight. He stood up, heading towards a small, dusty window barely holding its own against the vacuum of space. Outside, stars winked in the distance, oblivious to the petty dramas unfolding below them. It was a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, they were barely more than a blip on the radar of the universe. "All right, Ralston," he muttered to himself, clenching his fists. "Time to do something stupidly heroic." The screen flickered again, and this time it spat out a stream of data that might have been useful if it wasn't for the fact that half of it was gibberish. He smacked it, more out of frustration than hope. The machine whirred in response, tormenting him with beeps that sounded suspiciously like laughter. "Well, at least one of us is having fun," he said, before turning back to the room, trying to piece together a plan from the shambles of their situation. Oblivion's Edge wasn't just any station. It was a veritable monument to ingenuity and stubbornness, populated by those too resilient, or too foolhardy, to leave. And yet, even the most stubborn of them could feel the edges fraying, the station teetering on the brink of becoming a derelict in the starry sea. A noise from the corridor snapped him back to the present. Ralston tensed, reaching for the makeshift weapon he'd stashed under the console. It was a multi-tool jury-rigged into something vaguely threatening, more likely to take out a finger than an enemy, but it was better than nothing. "Who's there?" he called, stepping into the corridor with the kind of bravado that usually got people killed in horror holo films. The shadows shifted, resolving into Lyra, her face set in a grim mask. "You look like shit," she said by way of greeting, nodding to his improvised weapon. "And are you planning to fix the station or perform impromptu surgery?" Ralston lowered the tool, relief mingling with amusement. "Depends. You volunteering for a checkup?" she smirked, a flicker of something almost like warmth in her eyes. "In your dreams, Vega," Ralston chuckled, feeling the tension ease a fraction. "We're on life support, literally and figuratively." "Any luck on your end?" Lyra shook her head, her expression darkening. "Whoever our saboteur is, they're good." "Too good," Ralston frowned, the weight of their predicament settling back like an unwelcome guest. "So, what now?" she shrugged, a small, defiant gesture. "We keep looking, keep fighting. It's all we can do," he nodded, pulling himself up taller, feeling the stubborn flame of determination rekindle. "Let's make sure they regret choosing Oblivion's Edge for their little game." Lyra's smile was all sharp edges and steely resolve. "I like the way you think." They stood there for a moment longer, battered but unbroken, like survivors of some cosmic joke. And perhaps they were, but that didn't mean they'd go down without a fight. The station groaned ominously, a reminder of their looming deadline. Every creak, every shudder could be the last, but they had no intention of making it easy for the universe to pin them down. "Ready to get back to it?" Ralston asked, gesturing back toward the control room. "Lead the way, Captain," Lyra replied, with the kind of mock formal salute that spoke of shared history and 1,000 tiny rebellions against the inevitable. Together, they marched back into the dim heart of the station, their footsteps echoing a silent promise. They'd find their saboteur, stop whoever or whatever was trying to hasten their demise, and they'd do it with a style that would leave any watching gods shaking their heads in exasperation. Ralston took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and grit, and pushed open the door. Oblivion's Edge might be crumbling, but as long as they had breath in their lungs and a scrap of defiance in their souls, it wasn't over yet. "Let's show them what we're made of," he said, a grin stretching across his face. "Hopefully not just space debris," Lyra quipped, her eyes alight with a fire to match his own. Ralston Vega had never been the hero type, but in the depths of space, on a station that was one bad day away from becoming a floating tomb, he'd become something close enough. The console's glow cast Ralston's face in an unflattering shade of green, which suited the feeling in his gut as he stared at the jumble of numbers that seemed to dance across the screen like drunken ants. Somewhere in this chaos lay a nugget of truth, a clue that might just save them from becoming a cautionary tale told in space taverns about why you shouldn't play hero on a dying station. "Think you found something, or just trying to decipher alien poetry?" Curl's voice crackled through the intercom with all the charm of a rusty hinge. Ralston resisted the urge to flip the screen his middle finger, mainly because he wasn't sure if it was sentient enough to care. I got something, all right, but if it's poetry, it's the kind that makes you want to gouge your eyes out with a spork. Charming. Read me a line, will ya? Ralston squinted at the jumble, trying to tease out a pattern. Looks like a signal, stronger than the usual background noise. Could be related to our friend who thinks sabotage is a delightful hobby, or it's just cosmic white noise. Either way, sounds like a party. Lyra leaned over his shoulder, her presence a steadying force amidst the chaos. Any chance this might link to that galactic trial Jace mentioned? Ralston blinked, momentarily thrown off by the idea that anything related to a trial could be more than bureaucratic hell. A trial? You think this signal is some kind of evidence? Think about it, Lyra said, tapping the screen with a sharp fingernail that looked like it could do some real damage. If someone's using the station as a relay or a hideout, this could be tied to some larger scheme. Maybe our saboteurs covering tracks that lead somewhere big. Ralston's mind ticked over, the pieces starting to click. So we're not just dealing with some disgruntled employee or a half-baked anarchist. We might be part of a much bigger shitshow. Congratulations, Curl chimed in. You've officially made things more complicated. I didn't think it was possible. Ralston grinned, though it felt more like a grimace. Happy to exceed expectations. Right, Curl snorted. And here I thought we were just going to die of asphyxiation quietly. Lyra straightened, her eyes alight with a fire that had nothing to do with the dim glow of the console. We need to get this to Jace. He might be able to isolate the signal and track its source. Ralston nodded, feeling a spark of something that might have been hope if it wasn't so damnably cautious. I'll head down to the underbelly, see if I can't coax more out of these systems. You keep an eye out up here. If this is linked to a trial, we need all the cards on the table. And try not to blow yourself up while you're at it, Curl added. I'm running out of people to blame. Ralston pushed himself away from the console, glancing at Lyra. You ready to play messenger, girl? She rolled her eyes, but her lips quirked up in a smirk. Only if you promise to play the part of the idiot who gets himself killed. Deal, he said, already moving towards the door. Let's meet back here in 3 hours. If I'm not back, assume I've done something incredibly stupid. As usual, Lyra called after him, her voice tinged with affection and exasperation. As Ralston navigated the dim corridors, the station groaned around him like a tired old man with creaky joints. The lights flickered, casting jittery shadows that seemed to whisper secrets in the dark. Surely, the station itself was mocking him, its systems unraveling like a cheap sweater in need of a better tailor. The underbelly of Oblivion's edge was a tangled mess of pipes, wires, and all the things that kept the station from being just another chunk of metal floating in space. It smelled faintly of oil and despair, which was comforting in its own way. It was the scent of home, albeit a home that threatened to kill you every other Tuesday. Ralston ducked under a low-hanging pipe, cursing softly as something cold dripped onto the back of his neck. Great, just what I needed, an impromptu shower. He reached the terminal cluster, a spiderweb of cables and jury-rigged modules that looked like they'd been assembled by someone with a barely passing understanding of engineering and a death wish. He crouched down, prying open a panel to access the control board. As he worked, his mind wandered back to the signal. If they could trace it, they might just find out who was pulling the strings and why they seemed hell-bent on turning Oblivion's edge into a cosmic ghost ship. He couldn't help but admire the audacity of it, even as he hated the bastard responsible. Hours passed in a blur of half-formed circuits and muttered curses, the station's creaks and groans a constant companion. Ralston's fingers ached, the ache a dull reminder that he was far too human for this kind of work. But still, he persisted, driven by the stubborn refusal to let things end like this. Finally, the terminal spat out a burst of data, the screen flickering to life with a stream of numbers and symbols that made a twisted kind of sense. He leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a grimy hand. That's it, he muttered to himself. That's the thread we need. He reached for the comm, tuning it to Curl's frequency. Curl, you there? The response was a crackle followed by Curl's familiar drawl. "Still here, Vega. Figured you'd either solve the mystery or blow us all to hell by now. Good news, we're not dead. Yet." Ralston shifted, trying to find a comfortable position among the metal and dust. "I've isolated a section of the signal. I need you to patch this through to Jace. He might be able to make more of it than I can." "Copy that. Sending the data now," Curl replied. "Anything else while you're down there, or should I start planning your funeral?" Ralston chuckled, the sound dry as sand. "Hold off on the eulogy. I'm not done pissing people off just yet." The comm link went silent, leaving Ralston alone with his thoughts and the quiet hum of the station's guts. He pushed himself to his feet, stretching out cramped muscles as he prepared to head back to the control room. They had a lead now, a chance to unravel the mess they'd stumbled into. As he moved through the labyrinthine corridors, Ralston couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly. More of a sixth sense, honed from years of looking over his shoulder in the dirtiest corners of the galaxy. He paused, scanning the shadows with suspicion. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing in the metal confines. For a moment there was nothing, just the drip of condensation and the distant hum of machinery. Then a figure stepped from the shadows, hands raised in a gesture of peace. A lean man with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from stone, eyes sharp and calculating. "Easy there, Vega," the man said, a smirk playing at his lips. "Just thought I'd say hello." Ralston tensed, eyeing the newcomer warily. "And you are?" "Name's Marlin," the man replied, dropping his hands with an air of nonchalance that set Ralston's teeth on edge. "Been keeping an eye on things around here." Ralston snorted. "A little late for neighborhood watch, don't you think?" Marlin chuckled, a sound like gravel. "Maybe, but I figured it was time to step in before things got ugly." "Newsflash, buddy," Ralston said, folding his arms. "We're well past ugly. We're in a whole new realm of screwed." "All the more reason to lend a hand," Marlin said, stepping closer with the easy confidence of someone who either knew what they were doing or was too stupid to be afraid. Ralston hesitated, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Every bone in his body screamed to be wary, but he couldn't afford to turn away help, not now. "All right, Marlin. You got a plan, or are you just here for moral support?" Marlin's grin widened, a flash of teeth in the dim light. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping this station in one piece." Ralston laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Don't we all?" With Marlin at his side, they made their way back to the control room, the station's corridors a maze of flickering lights and uncertain safety. The weight of their task hung heavy, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Ralston felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Back in the control room, Curl was waiting, his expression a mix of relief and exasperation. "Took your sweet time," he said, nodding to Marlin with a raised brow. "Picked up a stray, I see." "Funny, I thought I was the one doing the picking," Marlin quipped, his tone light. Ralston shook his head, focusing on the task at hand. "All right, Jace should have the signal by now. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Could be a lead, could be a trap. Either way beats sitting around waiting to suffocate," Curl said, folding his arms. "What's the plan?" Ralston glanced at Lyra, her presence a reminder of what they stood to lose. "We dig in, prepare for a fight if we have to. Whatever happens, we hold this station." "Sounds like a party," Lyra said, her eyes glinting with steely resolve. Ralston nodded, feeling that same fire rekindled. Oblivion's edge might be on the brink, but as long as they had breath and a scrap of defiance, they'd fight for every inch. The station shuddered, a reminder of the stakes, but they stood firm, ready to face whatever the universe threw at them. In the grand scheme of things, they might be little more than dust in the cosmic wind, but they'd make damn sure to leave their mark. Ralston Vega stood in the control room of Oblivion's edge, feeling like the universe's favorite chew toy. The station was in worse shape than a politician's promises. As he surveyed the mess of flickering consoles and half-dead screens, he couldn't help but chuckle. If this hunk of junk was going to be their salvation, then they were in deeper trouble than he thought. Curl was at the other end of the room, fiddling with a console that seemed about ready to give up the ghost. "You know, Vega," Curl said, not looking up, "I think I preferred it when we were just slowly suffocating. At least then I didn't have to listen to this thing's death rattle." "You're just upset because it whines more than you do," Ralston shot back, tapping a screen that stubbornly refused to stop blinking red. "Besides, at least the station's got style. Kind of like an old dog that won't stop barking at the mailman." "More like an old dog that's crapped itself one too many times," Curl muttered, squinting at his console. "So, what's our next move, Mr. Universe's last hope?" Before Ralston could answer, the intercom crackled to life. "Got some good news and bad news," Jace's voice came through, tinny and distorted. "Good news. I've isolated the signal. Bad news. It's gonna lead us right to your least favorite kind of people," Ralston groaned. "Please tell me we're not talking about the intergalactic tax auditors again." "Afraid not," Jace replied with a chuckle. "Worse. We're dealing with the kind of folks who'd make a black hole seem like a nice vacation spot." Lyra, who had been quietly listening, leaned in closer. "So what's the play? We can't exactly invite them over for dinner." Ralston rubbed his chin, feeling the stubble that had crept up like an unwanted guest. "We'll have to outsmart them." Which is to say, not a high bar to clear, considering they're too busy plotting galactic domination to get a decent night's sleep. Marlin, lounging against the wall like he owned the place, chimed in. "Well, if you need a distraction, I can always offer my sparkling personality." "I think we'd rather stick with the old dog smell," Lyra said with a wry smile. "But thanks for the offer." Ralston tapped a few more keys, the console lights flickering like a cheap nightclub. "We have to engage their systems, make them think we're on the verge of a breakthrough. If they see us as a real threat, they might make a move." "And then what?" Curl asked, clearly unimpressed. "We throw a party and hope they bring the chips," Ralston shook his head. "No, once they are engaged, we use the station's systems to overload their signal, turn the tables, make them the ones scrambling for air." Marlin nodded, his smile sharp and dangerous. "Sounds like my kind of fun." "Just one problem," Lyra said, folding her arms. "You know how unreliable these systems are. We could end up blowing ourselves to bits instead." Ralston shrugged. "Well, if that happens, at least we won't have to worry about paying rent anymore. Plus, it's not like anyone's going to miss this place." "Speak for yourself," Curl said, frowning. "I kind of like it here. It's got a certain rustic charm." "Yeah, like a landfill," Ralston replied, grinning. "All right, everyone, let's get to work. Time to show these bastards what Oblivion's edge is made of. Rust and bad decisions," Jace piped up through the intercom. "Exactly," Ralston said with a nod, his eyes gleaming with the kind of mischief that came from years of skirting death. "Now, let's make this station sing." They split off, each going to their respective tasks. Lyra was on communication duty, ensuring their message would be loud and clear when the time came. Marlin and Curl were in charge of the more hands-on approach, jury-rigging systems and hoping they wouldn't end up with fried circuits or, worse, fried bodies. Ralston found himself in front of yet another stubborn console, one that seemed about as cooperative as a cat in a bathtub. He tinkered with the wires, half expecting sparks to fly and alarms to blare. Instead, there was just the steady hum of the station, like a beast waiting to be unleashed. "You know," Ralston said to nobody in particular, "this isn't exactly how I saw my life going. But then again, I never planned much beyond breakfast." Curl's voice came from somewhere behind a panel. "Well, you always did have a knack for making things interesting." "Even if interesting usually means about to explode," Ralston chuckled, twisting a wire into place. "You know me too well. Now let's give these guys a show they'll never forget." As the countdown began, the station seemed to hold its breath. Every creak and groan felt like it was keeping time with the ticking clock, the air heavy with anticipation. They were about to take a desperate gamble, but then again, desperate was the only kind they knew. The signal was sent, a digital beacon blazing across the void. It was both an invitation and a challenge, a flick of the wrist to their unseen adversaries. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of Oblivion's Edge and everyone aboard. The wait was excruciating, each second stretching into eternity. Ralston felt the weight of it all bearing down on him, the crushing pressure of a universe that hardly seemed to notice their existence. And then, as if the cosmos had finally decided to pay attention, the monitors began to light up. Alerts flashed with frantic urgency, warning of incoming ships responding to their call. They were here, and they were ready to rumble. Ralston grinned, a glint of wild defiance in his eyes. "Looks like we got their attention. Time to make them regret it." Marlin appeared at his side, a wicked gleam in his gaze. "Let's see if they can handle a little Oblivion hospitality." Curl's voice crackled over the intercom. "All systems primed, Vega. Just say the word." "Do it," Ralston said, his voice steady and sure. "Let's make this a day to remember." With a flick of switches and a punch of buttons, Oblivion's Edge came alive in a way it hadn't for years. Energy surged through the station, a torrent of raw power crackling through its veins. The station shuddered, but it held firm, a testament to its own stubborn will to survive. The disruptive signal was unleashed, an invisible wave sweeping out to meet their foes. It was a bold gambit, one that would test the limits of their resolve and the station's creaky systems. There was a tense silence, a heartbeat of calm before the storm. And then, like a dying star going supernova, chaos erupted. The enemy ships were caught in the web of interference, their systems faltering under the unexpected assault. It was a glorious mess, a symphony of disaster that sang a song of defiance. "Looks like they're having a bad day," Marlin remarked, the corners of his mouth quirking up in a smirk. "Just wait," Ralston replied, watching the screens with rapt attention. "They're about to have a worse one." As the signals clashed, the enemy ships struggled to regain control, their stuttering engines and failing systems a testament to Oblivion's Edge's final stand. The station might be a rust bucket, but it was proving to be one hell of a scrappy contender. Lyra's voice came through, steady and strong. "We've got them on the ropes, but we need to keep the pressure up. Don't let them catch their breath." "I'm on it," Ralston said, his fingers flying across the console. "Let's see if we can't turn this little skirmish into something they'll be telling their grandkids about." As the battle unfolded, Ralston used every trick he'd ever picked up in a life lived on the edge. He was relentless, pursuing every advantage with the kind of tenacity that came from having nothing left to lose. The station's systems were pushed to their limits, the consoles blazing with warning lights. But against all odds they held, defying expectation and reason. It was a delicate dance, a balance of precision and chaos that played out in real time. "How long can we keep this up?" Curl asked, his voice tinged with both trepidation and awe. "Long enough," Ralston replied, though he had no real way of knowing. He could feel the station strain, the way it trembled under the weight of their defiance. But he also felt its resolve, the way it seemed to rally under their hands. Marlin was a whirlwind, moving with a grace that belied his roguish appearance. He was in his element, thriving in the midst of chaos. "You know, Vega, I think you might just pull this off." Ralston snorted, his focus unwavering. "Don't jinx it. I've got a reputation to maintain." As the enemy struggled to respond, it became clear that Oblivion's Edge had more than met the challenge. The station's unlikely triumph was a testament to the grit and determination of its crew, a ragtag band of misfits who refused to back down. With one final surge, the enemy ships faltered, their systems overwhelmed by the relentless assault. The battle was won against all odds and reason. Oblivion's Edge stood victorious, a beacon of defiance in the dark. "Looks like we did it," Lyra said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. Ralston leaned back, exhaustion and triumph mingling in equal measure. "Yeah, we did. Who'd have thought, huh?" Curl let out a low whistle. "I guess this place has a few surprises left after all," Marlin laughed, a sound full of righteous satisfaction. "I always knew you had it in you, Vega. Now, how about we celebrate before something else decides to kill us?" Ralston glanced around at the worn faces of his comrades, their eyes gleaming with the fire of victory. Oblivion's Edge might be a dying station in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, but for this moment it was theirs. They'd made their stand, left their mark, and proved that even in the vastness of space, humanity could still triumph. As they reveled in their unlikely success, Ralston couldn't help but smile. The universe might not be fair, but sometimes, just sometimes, it gave you a win when you least expected it. And for now, that was more than enough. The lights flickered, a dance of shadows across Ralston Vega's face as he leaned against the battered console, the adrenaline of victory still coursing through his veins. Oblivion's Edge had survived against all odds, against all reason. But then again, reason had never been their strong suit. Holding the station together was like trying to keep a leaky lifeboat afloat with chewing gum and good intentions. But for now, they'd managed to patch the holes with enough bravado to keep them from sinking. "The trial's over," Jace's voice crackled through the intercom, a hint of satisfaction layered beneath the static. "Guess we're not getting evicted just yet." Ralston chuckled, the sound a low rumble in his chest. "Well, it wouldn't be the first time I overstayed my welcome." Marlin, ever the picture of nonchalance, sauntered over with his usual swagger. "Not bad, Vega. You ever think about opening a demolition company? You've got a real knack for blowing stuff up." "Only if you promise to be my first client," Ralston shot back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I hear you've got some skeletons in your closet that could use a little dynamiting." Lyra, who'd been quietly overseeing the communication systems, finally spoke up. "Well, as much as I'd love to continue this little love fest of sarcasm and bad jokes, we've got a station to patch up and a galaxy to pretend we give a damn about." Curl emerged from behind a panel, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that looked like it had seen better days. "You know, I might just miss this place when it's gone. It's got character." "Character?" Ralston raised an eyebrow. "It's a rust bucket held together by spit and spite." "Exactly," Curl replied, unfazed. "It's like you and this station were made for each other." Ralston snorted. "Yeah, well, let's see if we can get it back to barely functioning before we start naming our firstborn after it, huh?" The crew got to work, each member slipping into their roles with the kind of ease that came from long practice. They were a dysfunctional family, bound together by circumstance and a shared disregard for self-preservation. As they moved about the control room, the tension that had gripped them during the battle began to ebb away, replaced by the familiar rhythm of repairs and banter. "So, what now?" Marlin asked, leaning against a nearby console, arms crossed. "Do we turn this place into a tourist attraction?" "Visit Oblivion's Edge, where your chances of survival are as good as winning the Galactic Lottery," Ralston shrugged, his focus on a particularly stubborn circuit. "We'd probably get more visitors than we do now, but for the moment, I think we'll focus on keeping the lights on and the air breathable." "Baby steps," Lyra chimed in. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." "One miracle at a time, right?" "Right," Ralston agreed, though a part of him relished the challenge. He'd never been one to back down from a fight, and this station, for all its flaws, had grown on him. It was a part of him now, a testament. No, scratch that, an embodiment of his resilience and stubbornness. As they worked, bits of conversation floated through the stale air, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or curse as something, or someone, refused to cooperate. It was a symphony of chaos with Ralston conducting. "So, Ralston," Marlin called out, not looking up from his task, "what's it like being the hero for once? You going to start wearing a cape, or is that too much of a fire hazard around here?" "Hero," Ralston's laugh was a short bark. "I'm just a guy with a knack for surviving things I probably shouldn't." "Isn't that what makes a hero?" Lyra asked, her tone teasing. "Managing to scrape by and look good while doing it." "Well, if looking good counts, then we're doomed," Curl interjected, earning a chuckle from the others. Ralston shook his head, a crooked grin on his face. "Yeah, well, if that's the bar, then maybe there's hope for us yet." The Iors wore on, the crew losing themselves in the familiar routine of making the impossible slightly less so. Oblivion's edge, for all its quirks and indignities, was beginning to show signs of life, or at least a stubborn refusal to die. Panels were replaced, circuits jerry-rigged into submission, and systems coaxed back from the brink. "Think we'll get a commendation from the higher-ups for this?" Ralston mused aloud, half joking. "Or is that too much to hope for? Commendation. We're more likely to get a bill," Curl said with a snort. "You know how they love to nickel and dime us." "Well, if they come knocking, just tell them we charge by the miracle," Lyra suggested, her tone dry. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as they continued their work, the camaraderie palpable in the cramped quarters. They'd faced death and somehow come out on the other side, a little worse for wear but no less determined. It was a rare gift, one that Ralston didn't take lightly. Eventually the repairs were deemed sufficient for now at least, and the crew gathered in the control room, the air thick with shared exhaustion and a sense of strange contentment. "So, what do we do with our newfound fame?" Marlin asked, stretching out in his seat. "Throw a party, write a book, get matching tattoos. How about we just keep the station from blowing up for another day?" Lyra suggested, her eyes shining with amusement. "That's about as much excitement as I can handle." Ralston raised an imaginary glass, his voice mock serious. "To Oblivion's edge, may it continue to defy the laws of physics and common sense." The others raised their hands in a toast, laughter bubbling up in the enclosed space. It was a small victory, but it was theirs, and they'd earned every bit of it. As the laughter faded, Ralston found himself reflecting on everything that had happened, the challenges they'd faced, the bonds they'd forged. They were a ragtag crew, each with their own quirks and demons, but together they'd accomplished something remarkable. "Hey, Ralston," Curl said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You ever think about what comes next?" After all this, Ralston considered the question, his gaze thoughtful. "Not really," he admitted, "but I suppose we'll figure it out as we go, we always do." "Flying by the seat of your pants," Lyra said with a grin. "Your favorite strategy." "Hey, it's worked so far," Ralston retorted, his tone light. "Just don't forget to bring us along for the ride," Marlin added. "It's never boring with you around." Ralston smirked, the weight of their ordeal finally beginning to lift. "Wouldn't have it any other way." With that, the crew settled into the familiar routine of life aboard Oblivion's edge, the station a living testament to their tenacity and spirit. It might not be much, but it was theirs, and they'd fight to keep it. As they worked, the future stretching out before them in all its uncertainty, Ralston couldn't help but feel a glimmer of something new, hope. It was a rare and fragile thing, but in this moment it felt real, like something they could hold onto. Perhaps, against all odds, they'd find a way to make this dying station a home. Perhaps they'd find a way to navigate the chaos of the galaxy and come out on top. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd find a way to keep laughing in the face of it all. For now, that was enough. Oblivion's edge was still standing, and so were they. And as long as they were together, they could face whatever came next, one sarcastic comment at a time.